Hello, and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where we're fond of your lobster. My name is Jeff Grizz Ulrich, and
we're fond of ye lobster. Come on.
My name is Jeff Grizz Ulrich, and I'm here, as always, with my co-hosts, Hugo Panay and Josh Bradley. Hugo, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm trying not to lose my mind at Lovecraftian truths and eldritch horror.
And Josh, how are you?
Josh?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How are you doing?
Excellent. Looking forward to our discussion of The Lighthouse here today, and then watching the Super Bowl this evening. It's going to be a great day.
Or this afternoon if you're in Los Angeles, because it's early here.
I suppose that's true.
Yeah.
Well, so we'll begin as we always do. And by always, I mean, the last several months. What have we been watching this week? We'll start with Hugo. Since we last recorded, what have you watched?
Okay, so I'll try to speed run through this because I'm alone in the UK, and because of COVID, I'm only going to university half the time that you normally would, so it's a very weird exchange situation. So I've been watching a ton of movies. So in the past week, I've watched Jackass Forever, which was a ton of fun.
Great movie.
A great time. The best thing about it was there was a really, really old British lady in front of me, in the seat in front of me in the theatre, and she was laughing hysterically at every dick joke and every fart and
of which there are a lot of both.
Yes, there was a lot. Every time somebody got hit in the dick, she was just wailing. It was fantastic. The whole theatre was laughing more because of this lady. It was amazing. I watched Whiplash, which is a movie that I had missed.
Great freaking movie, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant film about people that I hate. I do not like. The only character that I like in the movie is Melissa Benoist's character, who's barely in it. I'm like, no, she's good. I like her. I'll be friends with her. Everyone else,
you don't like Paul Reiser?
No, everyone. Paul Reiser. Hang on.
His dad.
Who's that?
His dad.
The dad's good. The dad is also good, but he has a minor role. I would say, still of the main characters, they kind of everyone. Everyone in that movie annoys me, and I still think the movie is absolutely brilliant. Fantastic film. I also watched Burn After Reading, because I've been meaning to sort of catch up on some Coen Brothers movies that I hadn't seen. Another really, really bizarre film. It's a movie where, John Malkovich is walking half naked with an axe in his hand and down, in a port or something. It's incredibly weird.
Pretty standard stuff for John Malkovich, but
yes, it's an enjoyable. I think it's an enjoyable film, but not necessarily one of my favorite Coen Brothers movies that I've seen.
Speaking of J.K. Simmons, a great final moment from J.K. Simmons in that.
He's so good in that. I don't know how you feel about this. Nothing. We don't know anything.
I like it a lot. It took me a couple viewings to warm to that movie. I didn't know what to make of it after one or two, but now I'm extremely fond of Burn After Reading.
I still think it's really good.
Big recommend.
It's just not one of my absolute favorite Coen Brothers movies, which is still great. I also watched, in preparation for this, The Witch, or The Witch. The Witch, which is a film that. I don't know what to make of it entirely. I don't know what it's trying to tell me. But I think the experience of it is fantastic. There are a few moments of tension where I'm not the best with horror, where I was like, I don't know. I started it late at night and I was like, yeah, no, I'm gonna watch this tomorrow during the day. But good movie. Also, my favourite film that I watched this week was Happy Together, which is a film by Wong Kar-wai, who's a sort of celebrated Hong Kong director. He's director of In the Mood for Love, which you might be familiar with. It's his most famous movie. Happy Together, fantastic film. It is basically a film about being alone in a foreign country and feeling really lonely.
On the head here, isn't it?
Which, yes, maybe I could have picked a better time, but it just so happened to be about that. It's kind of sold as an LGBT movie, but it's really not about, that's incidental to the story, but great movie, especially because it's an LGBT movie, but that doesn't center around that necessarily as the only character thing about the character, and it is also made by a Chinese director in the 1990s, so very progressive, and also it's just an excellent film in terms of filmmaking, acting, and all of that. I watched the Uncharted movie, which you can find more thoughts about on the Remember the Film podcast feed or YouTube, because we recorded a little review with Grizz yesterday. I rewatched Batman Begins, because I'm rewatching some Batman movies before The Batman comes out. These movies have too many reboots, so they don't know how to name them anymore. But, Batman Begins, still absolutely great. And today, last thing I watched, I went to a screening of this documentary film called Hostile. It's not a film you'll have heard about because it hasn't been released. It basically is touring in the UK. It's by I think I'm not sure if she's I think she's Pakistani. She's a Pakistani immigrant to the UK who made a film about the hostile environment policy, which is like this policy about this policy the UK government has been imposing for immigrants in the country. It's a policy basically that makes their lives as complicated as possible. They don't have access to public funding for a bunch of stuff when they might need resources. The way you eventually become a citizen has been made much more difficult. It's a really heartbreaking film, and it makes you really angry. If it ever comes out on a streaming service, I would highly suggest it. It's really, really good, and it kind of reflects policies that a lot of governments, not only in the UK, have been introducing. Like, all governments in Western countries have been becoming much more conservative towards immigration, and a fantastic film. It'll break your heart, but very, very worth a watch. So yeah, that was me this week. Obviously, then we'll talk about The Lighthouse.
Well, I'll tell you, I managed to watch 2 other movies besides The Lighthouse in the intervening week here. I am, trying to catch up on some of the Oscar-nominated movies that I haven't seen yet, and so I watched Nightmare Alley. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was very good. I thought that we talked a little bit in our chats about it, about the ending being just a little unclear to me. But in my discussions, I found that other people seem to have very definitive viewpoints on it, which I can see the arguments that other people are making on it. I enjoyed it. I think it's great. I definitely suggest watching it if it's on HBO Max right now, and Hulu, I believe, as well,
and Hulu
in the US. So check that out. And then the other one I watched was Coda, a movie that I probably should have watched a long time ago because I already had the Apple TV subscription. I should have seen this months ago when they were advertising the crap out of it. But I waited, and it was good. I'm surprised it's a Best Picture nominee, but I thought it's great, and it's my kind of movie. Feel good stuff. Hugo, you haven't seen that yet, right?
I haven't, no.
But Josh, you have.
I have. I really enjoyed it. Nice little movie.
Do you think it's a Best Picture level movie or what?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's movies like this that have been nominated in the last few years, I guess. But I guess it'd be borderline. If I'd seen that, a few months ago with no context, I'm not sure I would have predicted that for it. But yeah, I'm glad to see it there.
I'm happy to see it there because it's my kind of movie. So I like when I like when movies I like are actually in the Best Picture nominees instead of movies I'm like, oh yeah, I can see the artistic reasoning behind it, but it's not going to be actually one of my favorite movies of the year. But Coda was really good.
Either of you see Sing Street 5 years ago?
No.
I have not, no.
The kid from Sing Street's in Coda, and it was the first time I've seen him in a movie since Sing Street, so I was very, very pleased to see that, so I was just curious. You guys see Sing Street, it's awesome.
Yeah, so that's what I watched in the last week. Josh, what did you spend your time on this week?
I also watched Nightmare Alley, and I think I may have liked it more than you did. I actually really enjoyed it. Especially because, after I watched it, I listened to an interview with Guillermo del Toro, and
who's just a delight.
Man, he is, first of all, just a delight, and also,
he's the best, yeah.
I don't know, he knows what he's doing. He's a smart guy, and what's funny is the interview was from December, so it was the interview was from long before Oscar nominations came out. But within the first 5 minutes of the interview, he was already talking and praising his collaborators and talking about the movie's production design, the costumes, and the cinematography. And those were the 3 Oscar nominations it got in addition to Best Picture, was the costumes, the production design, and cinematography. So that was really fun and prescient that he was shouting that out within, at the start of the interview. I also watched Encanto, which I really enjoyed. Good movie. And this is actually before we recorded last week, but I forgot to mention it last week. We watched Titanic. Had a couple friends over. all vaccinated, and we watched Titanic. And man, what a
Great
picture!
Movie. Yeah.
What a freaking picture! And I know that. Well, I don't know, but I assume me saying that may make me get a text message from listener and friend of the show, TJ Keeley, because I know that he has feelings on Titanic. But it's just so good, man.
Well, now I'm curious what TJ's feelings are on Titanic.
He doesn't like it?
I don't want to speak for him, but I think he likes it less than I do. But I don't know, man. I don't know what to say besides the romance really, really works on me, and the action set pieces in the second half really, really work on me. And I don't think that movie is really going for subtlety, but
no.
It's okay that it's not subtle. I don't know, that everything about that movie works for me. And also, like, this week I watched like a few I have the Blu-ray of Titanic, and I watched a few behind the scenes making of documentaries, and watching how they made it just makes you. I'm just in awe that movie came out half good, let alone one of the great movies of the last 30, 40 years, personally. So Titanic, it rules. And
that movie also, beyond the movie itself, it took on a life of its own as a cultural phenomenon, which I think has helped, keep it in people's minds.
Yeah, but I also think, I think that kind of led to backlash, which I'm not saying our friend TJ is buying into the backlash. I think that he's well enough forming his own opinions, but I think that its success really, caused some people to turn noses up at it, and they shouldn't, because it rules. It's worth every cent of the $600 million it made domestic. Personally, I think. It's awesome. Titanic.
Remember a time when a giant hyper box office success could win Best Picture? I missed that.
I mean, it's happened a few times. Even
Has it?
Return of the King.
Return of the King, yes. Then, which is 20 years ago.
Oh, don't remind me of that.
I'm sorry, I don't want to depress you, but that's 18 years ago.
I mean, I think that a movie like Titanic, if it came out today, would not make $600 million domestic. I think that's kind of...
That is also true. I think it's a bit of both. The cultural landscape has changed a lot.
I don't think the Oscars have really changed that much. I think just the movies that people go to see in theaters have changed dramatically in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that West Side Story didn't make any money is just baffling to me. It's Steven Spielberg remaking West Side Story. What more do you want? And no one went to go see it.
Yeah.
I'll never get over that, honestly.
But it is coming to Disney Plus first week in March. So
yeah, and I'm positive after December came and went and no one went to see it, that come March, suddenly my Twitter timeline is going to be ablaze with, oh my god, West Side Story is actually so good. Like, yeah, no shit.
Well, I went to see it, so...
That's true. I went to see it twice.
Yeah.
Well, I'll watch it on
better than
Disney
everybody.
Plus a couple of times to make up for it.
That's not how it works.
No, that doesn't help? Oh, my bad.
Well, you're missing out because it was a really, really great big screen experience.
I wanted to see it. We talked about this, and I was going to try to see it this week, but the nearest showing that wasn't at like 10 o'clock at night was at 8 o'clock, and it was like 50-minute drive to get to that theater. So
yeah,
I couldn't do that on a weeknight, and then they didn't have any showings this week, and they stopped having showings in my area on Thursday. So
that'll happen, unfortunately.
Oops, that's my bad. Well, so let's get into our film to remember for this week, which is The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers. This is his second feature film after The Witch.
Sorry. The Witch.
The Witch.
Please. Thank you.
Witch. The script started as a loose adaptation of an unfinished story, The Lighthouse, written by Edgar Allan Poe. Max Eggers, the director's brother, was having some difficulty adapting the fragmented material, so eventually Robert started working with him on it, and the final version only maintained the original premise. In developing the final version, they looked into the writings of Herman Melville, Robert Louis Stevenson, H.P. Lovecraft, and Sarah Orne Jewett to inspire what they wrote for the script here. And I think you can really see that.
Yeah.
Certainly Herman Melville, Robert Louis Stevenson, and H.P. Lovecraft jump out at you in various moments in this movie. Hugo, what did you wanted to say?
I added a note on the doc on this. Like, I think it's very interesting that this started as an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, considering how Lovecraftian it actually ends up being. Like, if I was to guess, if it was Lovecraft or Poe that was the original inspiration, I would think Lovecraft. So I just thought it was interesting.
See, and I can get the Poe from it because it is very depressing.
Well, also, I think like the story overall is more Edgar Allan Poe, but it just has flashes of Lovecraft.
Yeah.
I think the Lovecraftian stuff. I mean, I don't know much about H.P. Lovecraft, but like what I understand of his work, I feel like there's only like a few flashes that are understood to be outside the reality of the movie, maybe. But I guess we can talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. But generally, I think when you think of Lovecraftian horror, you think of there's some unidentifiable force that is larger than the characters, and that drives them to insanity, as if there's almost a knowledge of this force, of this, whether it's a being or an entity that is so incomprehensible to the human mind that it drives them, to insanity. So I think, kind of works for this. The tentacles are kind of tangential to that, and not necessarily the main focus.
The film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival on May 19th, 2019, and was later released theatrically on October 18th by A24. Raise your hand if you're surprised that A24 released this movie. Oh, no one?
No, yeah.
It grossed $18 million on $11 million budget, which I find that a little surprising given how much my timeline on social media blew up when this movie came out. Everybody was talking about this. How did everyone I know saw this and that not make just buttloads more money?
I think this is a very movie guy movie. And
yeah, Twitter's not
the
real
general
life.
public. The general public would hardly care about this. Even though I'm sure there would be. I think this would work for a general audience if they gave it a shot. But
I don't know if it would. But
I don't know.
I hyped it up when it came out. I was trying to get people to see it.
Yeah. Well,
I saw it in theaters.
It was almost universally critically acclaimed, but was only nominated for Best Cinematography at the 92nd Academy Awards. I see, we have a question here. Do you think this deserved more award consideration, and if so, in what categories? I mean, cinematography makes sense. Like that, I totally get that. I could also see production design for this one. But
for sure.
And then screenplay, adapted screenplay. Yeah. Maybe it's just that it was a tough year. I was gonna say maybe it was just too loosely adapted.
It was a very tough year. But I made a note just because at the Indie Spirit Awards, it was nominated for directing, male lead, editing, which editing I think is another one where it could have had a shot, supporting male performance, and cinematography. And it won supporting male for Willem Dafoe and cinematography. I'm not saying necessarily that it should have been nominated in 5 categories at the Oscars. If it was up to me, it would, but I understand why it wouldn't as a type of movie. But, Willem Dafoe in this movie is so freaking good.
He really
and I would have loved for him to be recognized as a supporting role. I just don't, it's so rare to get these wild performances. And I feel like, especially in the acting categories, and I feel the same way in for this year, what tends to be rewarded is a certain type of performance, and I think we sometimes ignore something that's more out there like this. I think he's incredible in this.
I agree.
I think he was absolutely deserving.
So is Robert Pattinson, for that matter.
So is Robert Pattinson. Yeah,
really
absolutely.
Excellent performances from both of them. So yeah, I could have seen it being in an acting nomination as well. What you got, Josh?
Do you remember offhand what it lost to at the Oscars in cinematography?
I don't, but I'm sure you do.
2019. hang on.
I do.
2019.
Blade Runner?
No.
But close. No. Interestingly,
Blade Runner was the year before. It was
2 years before, actually. 1917, correct. The same cinematographer as Blade Runner, the great Roger Deakins.
Yes. Roger Deakins.
Won 2 in 3 years after going 0 for 13, his first 13 nominations.
Which I'm okay with. I don't.
Yeah, honestly, if I had remembered that, I'd been like, of course it didn't win cinematography. 1917 is one of my favorite movies, and it's almost entirely based on the cinematography in that movie. But yeah, so I mean, what were the big winners that year besides 1917?
Parasite.
It was a tough year.
Was
it was
the
a tough
best
year
picture.
For sure.
And
Yeah,
several
and
other
then
awards,
the
director.
supporting actor winner was Brad Pitt, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Adapted screenplay was Jojo Rabbit, and if that hadn't won, you had Little Women waiting right there. So like, and The Irishman waiting right there.
That is a tough year.
So very tough year to break into those categories.
I still think not even getting nominated. Like I think one nomination for this movie is a little low. I would have liked to see a weirder film be, considered.
Well, I'm sure Robert Eggers will continue to make weird films, and I'm sure one of them at some point will be recognized more fully by the Academy.
I hope so.
Maybe it'll be The Northman, which is, again, the reason we're discussing this today, because that's one of my most anticipated movies of the coming year. And that was based purely on what I had seen from trailers and Robert Eggers' reputation. I hadn't even seen this movie before.
You hadn't seen this before? This is your film to remember, and you hadn't seen it before?
Correct.
This episode?
Yep.
Okay.
Because I wanted to watch. We had discussed previously that this was going to be a movie that we end up doing as a film to remember. So like it was inevitable, and why not now, right? So,
sure.
It was inevitable.
So the premise of the movie is that two men are left on an island to manage a lighthouse in the late 1800s. The more experienced of the two men has some very odd behaviors and is incredibly controlling of the younger man, who is doing this work for the first time. He won't let him into the room with the actual light. In fact, like he's adamant that screw the rule book that says we're supposed to take turns. I do the light.
I tend the light.
I tend the light. And so he won't let him in there. And forces him to do the majority of the grunt work. If you might even say all of the grunt work. There are a few moments where he helps with some stuff, but in general, it's all the young man who's doing this. But shortly after being on the island, the young man begins to see things that he isn't sure that he actually saw, and that surprised me because that actually starts very early in the movie. Which I expected, knowing the premise, I expected it to happen, but I thought it would, the madness would set in a lot later. I was expecting, but he continues to grow more and more angry about how he's being treated, and is pushing on because soon the ship will be back to take them back to the mainland. But a storm complicates things, and they get trapped there, and kind of become friends, begrudging friends for a moment there, only to then lose their minds entirely. And tensions grow. They don't trust each other, and all perception of time falls away, and the young man's sanity becomes more and more tenuous at best. So that's what the movie is generally about, is a guy going insane. But it's about so much more than that as well, which we will get into here. We've already touched on it a little bit, but we were talking about the acting and how we all really like Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. What did you want to say on this, Hugo, on the acting?
I just think the fact that you get this script with this type of dialogue and this type of they talk in not only
period dialect kind of
in a very period specific dialect
and regional specific
and it's New England
and regional it's Maine specifically. They were talking about we did a lot of research on Maine dialects from that time, and the fact that it jumps from a scene of calmness to them laughing together to then becoming incredibly tense, and then it's surreal, and then it's horror, and then it's almost funny. It's like there's so much here that if the acting isn't completely committed and on point, would not work. And I think these actors bring out this story so well. I think I was watching an interview with Robert Pattinson, and he was saying we rehearsed this. We would rehearse the whole movie in sequence together, just me and him, and we did this for weeks in preparation. Like not for weeks, but he said for over a week in preparation for the movie. We would just do it a couple of times a day, just to have that script so internalized and then just act it out on screen. And I know that Eggers, the director, has a background writing and directing in theatre as well, and I think it really shows because it just makes this one location so interesting and so alive, and I think the performances enhance that so well. I love them two together. I would watch a sequel to this. Like, I just want to see them interact and say insane stuff to each other. Yeah.
Also, I mean, kind of your point, Hugo. It's only two actors in the whole movie, so they both have to be really good, and to carry it, and they both are so good. And like,
there are technically, I guess, 5 actors in total, but they're the only ones who have lines. So
unless you count screeching as a line.
Unless you count screeching, yeah.
I mean, I have the Lighthouse on right now as we're recording in the background, and like, Willem Dafoe has such a crazy, interesting face, and like, you believe instantly that this guy exists in the 1890s. Yeah, it's insane. And like, Rob Pattinson also, like, I mean, he's got more of a movie star face than Willem Dafoe does, but he's still, like, with the mustache and the jawline, he also looks really believable as an 1890s guy. And like, they're both so good, but especially Dafoe.
I do want to applaud Pattinson's accent. Obviously,
Agreed.
The more unique an accent is, frequently the easier it is to learn it. And he has that New England, Boston sort of accent going there, but he nails it. And if you didn't know, like, if you were coming into this and you had no idea who Robert Pattinson was, you wouldn't even think for a moment that he's British.
Yeah, watch him give an interview in his natural accent, then watch him in this, and then watch him in like Good Time, where he's got a very, very Queen's accent, and it's wild.
He's a really good actor, and I'm glad that he's getting more and more interesting roles to showcase that. Because obviously he got started with Twilight, and it kind of.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's very interesting to me that both Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart, both got their rose to stardom in Twilight, and in those movies were largely considered bad actors.
Not great, yeah.
And we see with the hindsight being 2020 here, we can see they're not bad actors. There must have been something else wrong with those movies, but because
Kristen Stewart is nominated for an Oscar this year.
For an Oscar this year. Robert Pattinson, excellent. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. I can't wait to see him in the Batman.
Yes.
But yeah, so I thought the acting is excellent, and we've talked about this a lot in the past, but I'm always impressed. The fewer actors you have, the more weight they have to carry, and they do a great job on that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the next thing I want to discuss is the cinematography of this movie, which is a standout for sure. You notice it right away, because how could you possibly not notice the aspect ratio is 4:3.
Academy aspect ratio, not even 4:3.
It's not even 4:3.
Yeah. It's 1:9 to 1, so it's actually narrower than 4:3.
Yeah, it's almost square. It's as close to square as you can get.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I also see that Josh wants to talk about the sound design on here as well. But let's start with just the aspect ratio, because it's a truly unique choice, especially in this day and age. I think that it really adds to the insanity being built, because it, as the viewer, it makes you uncomfortable watching just a little bit because it's not what you're used to. So right off the bat, you're getting that vibe. But then it also, I think, adds to the isolation of the characters as well. You can really kind of feel that vibe, even just from the aspect ratio. What do you guys think, Josh?
Well, who wrote claustrophobia on the outline? Was that me or Hugo?
I wrote it.
Okay. Well, I had the same thoughts. I couldn't remember if I wrote that too. So do you want to do that first? Then I can talk?
It just puts you in a sense, it oppresses you. It is oppressive. It makes you feel the claustrophobia. And in some ways it puts you...
closing in on you.
Yeah, it puts you on edge, and it's good to be put on edge even just by the visual of this movie, because it's trying to make you feel like the character is feeling. And I think it achieves that very, very well. The Witch also has a non-traditional aspect ratio. It's closer to like a 16:9. So it is not as wide as a movie. And he really wants to use like the height of the frame in interesting ways. I think it makes his movies look very unique. And it works perfectly for this film specifically. I think watching this in theaters must be a really, really interesting experience.
It was cool.
It's just so different from what you're normally used to. Also, like, I think part of it is also just this movie is in conversation with, I think you wrote this as well, with Ingmar Bergman's persona a lot.
We'll talk about Bergman in a little bit, yeah.
So, and I think even just the visual choice is in some way, in reference to that as well.
Right. That also, I mean, I read that the visual style is inspired by like photography from this time period, where photographs were not widescreen at the time; they were basically square. But also, like you said, it's claustrophobic, which I think works. I noticed in the most recent watch, there's a lot of like squares within the squares, like when the view from like inside the cistern, looking up at Rob Pattinson, it's just like basically boxes him off even more, tightens him in even more, and traps him in even more than the frame already is. Also, like, because it's not wide, the aspect ratio kind of lends itself to vertical imagery. Like, picture like the lighthouse itself. When you film the lighthouse with this aspect ratio, the lighthouse itself takes up most of the frame. And had you shot it in widescreen, it would be a mostly empty frame with the lighthouse in the middle. So it lends itself to vertical imagery like the lighthouse. And there are a few times where it cuts like from a shot of the lighthouse to Rob Pattinson, also filling out the frame vertically. So it kind of works with the setting and the production design. Yeah.
Well, so the other thing here, the sound design, it's very noticeable and at moments, but then also fades into the background really well. Like in particular, I'm talking about the foghorns blaring.
Yeah.
Because there are moments where it's like right in your ear, and which even you can see visibly irritates Ephraim throughout the movie. But then, if you're paying attention, you can still hear the foghorn, off in the distance in a lot of the other scenes, and so it still adds even more to that that tension, because that repetitive tone, it gets its way into your mind and it gets stuck there.
Yeah, it really does.
It's really great stuff.
I like how they also use it above the characters. Like, it's almost as if he's here, like, because there's like one scene where there's a storm happening and he's outside and he finds a severed head and he starts screaming, but you don't in the movie, in the mix, you don't actually hear his scream almost at all, because all you hear is the foghorn that's BOOM, and he goes back in and the other character says, what are you screaming for? And in your head you almost didn't realize he was screaming because you were hearing the foghorn, and the way they make these noises overlap, it really puts you in that sense of, it gives you that feeling of dread that it's really trying to make you feel. And you notice that the foghorn comes in, the more the movie has surreal moments, the stronger the foghorn is in the background, which I think works really well. Because at the beginning they kind of introduce this as this thing that has to do with the boat, and then when it's reintroduced later, it's always close to these moments of heightened reality.
And I also think that it was interesting. The foghorn sound is identifiable as a foghorn, but it's also slightly, I felt like it was slightly different than what I usually picture in my head as the sound of a foghorn. It almost reminded me of, do you remember in Annihilation, especially in the trailers for Annihilation, there was a sound effect that they played, and when I heard the foghorn sound, it really reminded me of that, which, again, in Annihilation, that sound signifies some moments of great discomfort. So I don't know how much they edited the sound of a foghorn or anything like that, or if they chose a particular foghorn to make this sound, but it was the right choice for this movie. I
also like how a clever little sound editing, sound design moment is when Rob Pattinson is masturbating, and then it kind of fades to black as he finishes. But he grunts, and as he grunts, there's a sound effect of a wave crashing. Which I thought, I see what you're doing there, movie. And also, at the very, very end, as the sound becomes distorted when he finally gets to see the lighthouse light, which I really enjoyed.
What a great scene. Well, but we're definitely going to talk about the ending here later. But yeah, so it's easy to see why this movie got a cinematography nomination. And, as we already discussed, unfortunately, was up against some real heavy hitters. but absolutely excellent. But this is actually the next thing we're going to talk about is something that I am very curious to hear everyone's thoughts on. Josh put the question in as this, and we'll just jump in right with this question. What do you make of the farting?
Hugo, what do you make of the farting?
Okay, so in the same interview that basically Robert Pattinson did one of those GQ interviews where they go through all the major characters that he played in his career. And when he talked about this movie, he talked about it in a way that said, "Oh, to me and Robert Eggers, this movie was like kind of a hilarious comedy. Like the way we read it and the way we tried to do it, we wanted to have the comedic element in it, even though it's a very disturbing, psychological horror thing." And I think the comedy is completely intentional. And I think there are moments in this movie that made me laugh more than most comedy movies do, because like it's so unexpected, and the acting changes so much. There are moments where both of them become like almost pleading and pathetic, and then the second later they're these heightened characters talking about Neptune and "Are you fond of me lobster?" is my favorite scene in the movie because of that, because it's like it goes from being very comedic. He's like, but you're fond of me lobster," and you see the like a eyes pleading of somebody,
eyes, like, "Please tell me you're fond of my lobster."
"Oh my God, I cannot believe you don't like my cooking." Like he's very upset about it in a funny way. But then he becomes this like almost mythical creature. He's shot from below and the light is all dramatic, and he's screaming
HARK
about
Triton. HARK!
He's screaming about like this weird thing about Triton and mythology, and you'll be less than dead, your body will be part of the sea and all that, and then it just silence, and he's sitting there and he's like, "Fine, have it your way, I like your cooking." That to me, I laughed so much at that scene because it was like so out of left field and unexpected. I think the farting is just an example of that. There are so many moments in this movie where they're being serious, but to me, it comes off as absurdly comedic, and it really works.
I can see the comedy as well, and if I were to describe this movie, I might describe it as the darkest comedy, because it's really dark, and you probably shouldn't be laughing, but there's so much. Yeah. There's so many moments like that are like funny, and especially given the great discomfort you're in, it's almost a nervous laugh that you have to yourself there. And that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, Josh, what do you make of the farting?
Would you guys indulge me if I read like half a page of the screenplay real quick?
Of course.
Out loud?
Yeah, by all means.
Okay. So, real quick, the characters are identified in the screenplay as young and old. That's just how the characters are identified. So that's important to know. This is from page 4, so very start of the movie. Old stands near his bed, pissing into his chamber pot. Pause. Young absorbs the scene. Young walks to the unoccupied bed and sits down. As soon as he does, Old farts about 3 feet away from Young's face. A deliberate display of power. Pause. Old finishes relieving himself, shakes his member, he buttons up, kicks the pot under his bed. The piss nearly sloshes out. Mercifully, it doesn't. Old lips away, whistling. He pauses briefly, farts again. So the script specifically calls this out as like a display of power. That's interesting. Is like, you're 3 minutes in the movie, and you have these two characters who are sharing quarters for the first time, and the second he sits down, Willem Dafoe kind of claims his territory, in a way that's funny because farts are just always hilarious. Robert Eggers knows that, but it's also really sets up a dynamic between the two immediately.
It's 100% like from that moment on, you are already perceiving the old man as experienced, and not just experienced at the job, but like he's probably done this exact thing to previous other coworkers because that's how he's going to make sure that he gets to control the situation. He puts himself on top from the beginning. And
as we'll discuss, he is, their relationship is slightly him on a power trip. Slightly. Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that, but that's kind of establishing that in a very comical way right out the gate.
So the other thing I want to talk about with like it being comedy, this movie is listed as horror thriller, and drama, and like it's got a bunch of stuff. But the reason I didn't watch this movie when it first came out was because it was being told to me by other people as a horror movie, and we've talked about this with with previous horror films that we've discussed. That I'm not a fan of a large portion of the horror genre, and because of that, I didn't watch this movie. after watching this movie, I did not really feel that this was a horror movie at all. It's very much a thriller in my mind, and so we've talked about that. I don't want to belabor the point too much because like I said, Josh and I have had this conversation many times where I get upset about the labeling of a genre, and Josh is like, "Who cares, dude? Just watch the movie." But I mean, Hugo, you felt this was very much a horror movie, right?
I think so. I think it's a psychological horror. It's a Lovecraftian horror. That there are supernatural, horrific elements, mythological, supernatural elements to it. I mean, we can discuss whether they're all in his head or if some of it is actually happening or not. But I think it's kind of putting him in front of something that his mind is unable to sustain, and that breaks his mind. And I think in that way, it's already horrific enough to be, a horror movie.
Go ahead, Josh.
It's interesting to me that if you go on Wikipedia, like it usually says blank is and they identify the genre in the first sentence of a Wikipedia entry. For example, Nightmare Alley says, Nightmare Alley is a 2021 American neo-noir psychological thriller film. If you go to The Witch, Robert Eggers' first movie, The Witch is a 2015 period supernatural horror film. The Lighthouse entry just says, The Lighthouse is a 2019 film directed by Robert Eggers.
Right.
And then at the end of the intro paragraph, it says, the genre has been debated. The film has been alternately described as a horror film, a psychological thriller, a survival film, and a character study. And I don't know what I'd call it. I guess I'd call it like a psychosexual thriller. That's probably what I'd call it more than anything else. Certainly more than horror.
Yeah, and I think it basically makes it very clear. It's interpretation. All the scenes where there is the Lovecraftian elements, I, as the viewer, never interpreted that as a possible reality. Even from the jump, in my mind, it was things he was seeing in his mind. So I suppose if you are open to the idea that maybe some of this is actually happening and there is a supernatural element to it, then that can open it up to being a little more horrific. But I think that's fascinating about this movie in particular, because there's movies that I felt are mislabeled, like Silence of the Lambs being called a horror movie. Like, yes, he does some really screwed up stuff in Silence of the Lambs, but to me, it's more of a cop story than a horror movie. But this one, I can see the arguments for some horror stuff, but I don't know. I just thought that it's very interesting. And then when we add in the comedy element, it's like, what a crazy blend this movie is.
Let me go on record saying I don't think this is a comedy, like, at all.
No.
I think it just has like a few funny moments that you wouldn't a few moments of levity you wouldn't expect in a movie that is otherwise very dire.
I don't know. It's definitely I wouldn't label it as a comedy by any stretch, but there's enough comedic elements that it enters in the conversation for me, because it's not just the farts. I mean, there's the farts, there's your lobster, there's just the actual lines of dialogue. You're spilling your beans, boy.
Honestly, one of the best shit jokes in a movie that I've seen in a long time, which we can talk about now.
The seagull that waits for him in front of the steps and then just kind of messes with him. That's funny too. There's a lot of humorous elements to it, but it is all in service of making the young man crazier and crazier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which brings me to, I guess, we can talk about, no, I'm going to talk about this first. Ephraim, as what we're told his name is when we're first told his name, is the young man in the movie. And he is going insane throughout the film. So my question is, how much of Ephraim's perspective do you think is real, and how much is, delusion? Josh, you want to go first?
Yeah. In the first half, like you said, there's visions very early on in the movie. In the first 10 or 12 minutes, he has a thing where he leaves the lighthouse and sees someone out in the water, goes out to investigate. There's a great close-up on his face as the water's neck level and his eyes are wide and terrified. But then that cuts to him waking up in bed with water dripping on his face. That's the cinematic language there is implying that he's dreaming that, and that's not actually happening. And I feel like most things that happen in the first half fall under that category, where like the movie kind of makes it clear that this is just a vision or a dream or something like that. So what was your question? Is he delusional from this? Is he delusional from this part? I don't necessarily think so. At least like the movie kind of shows that like the movie separates what is happening in his head and what is actually happening in real life. But then around the midpoint, it starts to mess with you more. I'm thinking specifically of when they miss their relief, which again is the midpoint of the movie. And
he says like, you know, we missed it yesterday, and you know, old Tom is like, it's been weeks. Like, what are you talking about? Right, yeah.
From there
when it starts to mess with you.
I'm going to call Rob Pattinson Ephraim. I'm going to call Willem Dafoe Tom. Yeah, Tom begins to either we get the first suggestion that Ephraim is actually losing his mind, or Tom is gaslighting Ephraim in a really shitty, fucked up way. So but then there's stuff in the second half that it's really hard to make of what actually is real and what's not. Particularly, you know, things that Ephraim does to Willem Dafoe and vice versa. Ephraim. You know, we see Willem Dafoe go crazy with an axe and chop up the lifeboat, but then he immediately says, Ephraim, you did that. You chased me with the axe, not the other way around. And I really don't know what to make of it, but it's frustrating as viewer, and I think there's also works well because it's frustrating for Rob Pattinson.
There's also another vision of the siren. There is the time where he goes to the lighthouse and he sees tentacles, where we don't get a scene of him waking up. We just get a jump cut to a scene during the day, but you know, it's not framed in the same way as that first time when he sees the siren, which is true, he wakes up. So I think the movie, you can interpret it in different ways. You can either think it's literal, so you can think that what you're seeing on screen is happening. So you can believe that there is definitely a supernatural element to it. And I think the more you get into the movie, the more it's hard to explain how some of it isn't happening, like how some of it would be only in his head. As you said, Josh, because the movie starts to mess with you and your perception more and more, which is exactly what's happening to him. Or you can think that, you know, driven by his guilt, we find out later in the movie that he murdered one of his co-workers. So I think it would be his supervisor in the previous job that he had, and stole his name and identity and left. Well, didn't murder him, but didn't save him. Which is interesting because he's going to play Batman, but whatever. And you can interpret that as kind of him going insane, or you can think that, you know, he was insane in the first place, and maybe there weren't even two people on that lighthouse. Like, I think those are the three ways you can see the movie. But my question is, does it matter entirely, or is what it makes you feel and what it's trying to kind of say mean more than necessarily what is literal and what is not?
So,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't matter, in the grand scheme of things, but it matters in that you should have this conversation with yourself.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
The different metaphors that this movie has, they're all there, but they change depending on which version you're interpreting it as at that time. Like, I was going to make the argument that the murder that we find out about, or rather the non-saving that we find out about later in the movie, was a breaking point for his mind, and that he has in fact been delusional from before, and it just gets worse as the movie goes on, which is why, you know, he has the crazy dreams and things at the beginning, so soon after arriving on the island. And they even talk about right at the beginning, he's running from something. Well, so we believe he's running, like we find out later about this person he let die, so he's running from that. But it also, in my mind, he's running from these, you know, his own psychoses that he is beginning to realize that he has. So he isolates himself to try to get away from everything, right? So, that's why I thought it's very possible that he was delusional from the start. But again, as Josh said, you know, there's moments like there's moments where they show you him clearly waking up from a dream. And so is a weird dream like that a sign of delusion, or is it just a weird dream? What do you got, Josh?
Well, that also brings up the question. It's interesting. I kind of get what you're asking more now. Like, within the reality of the movie, what causes, assuming he goes mad in the back half, which I think he does, what causes that? Is it just the isolation, or was there something about the island that makes him go mad? Is there something about his past life that's making him go mad? And that's an interesting question.
Is it his partner gaslighting?
Yeah, is he being gaslighted or gaslit?
Do we want to talk about this interpretation now, or do you want to save this?
We can go into all of this. I mean, this whole episode, I'm not bothering to put up a spoilers thing because you can't talk about this movie without talking about all the spoilers all the time.
Sure.
So.
I guess I think that he has. I think there's something about the island. The movie kind of suggests there's something about the island that makes people do this because, Tom does say his previous apprentice also went mad and was talking about sirens and mermaids and bad omens. And so the fact that all kind of happens to Ephraim kind of suggests there's maybe something going on here. And the fact that Tom does what he does with the lighthouse itself, with the light going up there and stares at it and is obsessed with it. There's clearly implication there's some kind of mythical thing happening with the lighthouse as well. But I think mostly it's isolation and gaslighting that make him go mad. But maybe there's something about the island that makes him have these crazy visions of mermaids and crazy visions of heads in lobster cages and that kind of stuff. So I think within the reality of the movie, he wouldn't have gone mad had he not come to this island, I guess what I would say. Okay. But a combination of the island, whatever mythical forces are at play here, and Tom and isolation make him go.
It's kind of the Shining question, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great comparison.
It's quite similar because you never. I mean, the book, obviously, it's very clear in the book that Stephen King doesn't like the adaptation because it doesn't confirm that there's ghosts and it was built on a cemetery or stuff like that. But the movie makes it completely up to you to decide what was real, what wasn't, why did he go insane, and I think this one does a very similar thing.
Throughout the movie, and again, this was my first time watching it, very early on, I started thinking that there might just be one person on the island, Ephraim, who is, having a psychotic break and is, has created this persona of the old man, Tom. And we, of course, later find out that Ephraim is not his real name. He has stolen it from the person he killed, and that his real name was Tom. So, very convenient that, the old man was named Tom as well.
Did you watch this on Amazon Prime, Chris?
I did, yes.
I did as well, and if you pause it, if you pause a Prime movie, it identifies which characters are on screen at the moment, and their character names and actors. Did you notice that when you pause it says Willem Dafoe, Thomas Wake, Robert Pattinson, Thomas Howard. Thomas Howard. Is how he's. Yeah. Did you see the two Thomases and come to that? Start thinking that?
I didn't see that because I didn't pause. In the whole movie, so I didn't see.
That's a ringing endorsement.
Until after, it is a ringing endorsement. But that's when afterwards I always end up going to IMDb and looking up facts and things like that about the movie, and that's what you see how they're listed in the cast. They're both listed as Tom. So I was like, oh man, that totally lines up with what I was thinking throughout the movie. That that's actually what they're listed as in the casting.
And as I said in the script, they're identified as young and old, which could, maybe if you're reading into this, that could maybe imply that they're the same, two versions of the same person. The young version, the old version. Which again, to me, fit with the other thought I had, which was that he was breaking from the moment he even got to the island, because obviously he arrives on the island and creates this other persona.
And to me, when I read this, I almost started thinking, but what if actually Willem Dafoe is the one person that is there, and he's this younger version of himself to kind of almost as if he's had a break with this lighthouse, and he started seeing this sort of something in the lighthouse that has made him completely lose his mind, and he starts to project a younger version of himself to torment and to keep away from that truth. It's the movie can be seen in so many different ways, and I think what is interesting about it is that it doesn't provide questions for anything, so it ultimately is more about how it makes you feel and what the movie is about than what is actually going on.
I think this is something that Josh is probably going to tell me. I think that's a stretch, but we'll see. I read the name of Tom Wake as an indicator of a couple of things. Wake is what trails behind a ship, and wake is also the time period after someone dies. So I was reading that as, he is the wake of his psychotic break is how I was looking at Tom. And then at the end we see that Ephraim is being picked apart by seagulls on the beach. And so then I was also thinking, like, he did die, so like this whole time is him dying. And that's not to say that the events didn't happen necessarily, but like the whole process of him being on this island is his dying. And I don't know, I just thought it was an interesting choice that his name was Wake, and then I started trying to make connections to that. What you guys think? Anything that makes any sense, or am I just jumping?
I think these are all interesting thoughts. I'm not sure that the movie would support these interpretations. I'm not sure that this is found in the text. Like, for example, I think like the idea that maybe they're the same person is, I think, an interesting thought to have while you're watching it and think to yourself, I wonder if that's where this is going. But I think the movie plays out and shows you that that's not actually the case. That'd be my... I think you'd have to read quite a bit beyond the text to say they're actually the same person and he's just having a psychotic break moments before his death in like a Jacob's Ladder situation. Like,
I think that there aren't enough hints for that to necessarily be the case.
I started thinking about the name Wake, and I was like, okay, go ahead, Josh.
Coming back to adaptation, when Donald Kaufman is pitching to Charlie Kaufman the idea of his movie, The Three, Charlie says, okay, but in the reality of this movie, what is actually happening? And like, Donald doesn't have a good answer. And like, I think this movie is clear about some things about the reality of what's actually happening. That there are these two people, and one of them murders the other and goes crazy. I think the movie is telling us that's what's happening, but like anything peripheral to that, there's a lot open to interpretation peripheral to that. But I think that like, if this is actually one guy alone on an island having a psychotic break and like talking to his past or future self and then dying, like, I'm not if that's the case, then like what is actually happening, when he's cleaning out the chamber pots, when he's singing, dancing, and drinking and cooking, like, we need to be based in something of what we're actually watching, I guess.
Okay.
An actual reality.
But I think I agree ultimately, but I think it is interesting that the movie makes you wonder about those things.
I agree.
Especially when you find out the script, they're named Old and Young. Right?
Well, I think that could also just be like an anonymity thing. Like it could be two guys.
I'm just saying, like, it's a tinfoil hat. Like, I can make these connections, and like a crazy person, like,
and if
Always
you
Sunny
want to talk
about
about
the stuff on the board.
if you want to interpret the names and read into the names, I didn't think of this till just now, but Robert Pattinson's name is Thomas Howard, which is I believe that's the alias that Jesse James used to use when he didn't want to be found out as Jesse James. So if you want to talk about a criminal who's on the run and not want to be found out, a guy named Thomas Howard is an interesting character name choice.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I wish we were friends with Robert Eggers so he can tell us why these names were chosen.
I think he would be the kind of guy that would tell you it. I'm not going to tell you.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that. No.
Yeah, no.
But on this topic, Grizz, I put this in the outline under the section where you said, "Are they the same person?" That was the thought you had, which brought me to Persona, which is something that Hugo mentioned earlier. So there's a podcast called the A24 Podcast where it's just like two people having a conversation, which I really enjoy. I recommend it. And an episode a couple years ago was Ari Aster and Robert Eggers effectively just interviewing each other. And it's just, basically them just having a conversation. And the A24 Podcast is the episodes are usually like half an hour, 40 minutes. And for this episode, they released the regular episode, but then had to release a second episode that had like more tangent, like a longer version. And it's the only time they've ever done that, as far as I know. And the reason they did that is because Ari Aster and Robert Eggers just talked about Ingmar Bergman for like 20 minutes. And like that would have been the bulk of the episode, but they just added that as a supplementary longer version of the episode. So they're both fond of Bergman, which makes sense. I haven't seen a ton of Bergman myself, so I can't like comment fully, but I have seen Persona, and this movie has an awful lot of overlap with Persona, which is a movie that Hugo and I have both kind of voiced a fondness for over the course of this podcast. Grizz, remind me, have you seen Persona?
I have not.
Okay.
It's one of those movies that sounded scary.
It's no scarier than this. In fact, it's less scary.
So then I'm probably going to watch it.
Well, the premise of that is, it's an actress stops talking inexplicably, and a nurse is kind of tasked with watching over her and figuring out what's going on with her, and they go to a remote island together, and weird things happen at night, and eventually the two women on this island kind of slowly start to merge, and like the actress is wondering, or the nurse is wondering, is she the I don't know. It's there's a lot of weird stuff happening, but it's
their identities
in line with this
start
movie
to kind of overlap and contrast, and they become antagonistic towards each other, and then they also are really close, and there are a lot of similarities with The Lighthouse.
But it's two characters isolated on an island, and then weird things start to happen, and then they might slowly start to be losing their minds. That's kind of what Persona is, and that's what this is. So I'd be interested to hear what you think after watching Persona, what you think of like the one person theory in The Lighthouse, Grizz.
Oh, yeah, well, we can definitely come back to that. So the other thing that we were talking about earlier is that each of or at least that I was talking about, the way you're interpreting the movie as you're watching it also highlights to me different, themes and metaphors that this movie is talking about. And so now I just kind of wanted to kind of go in, what are the themes that stood out to us? I'm guessing there's no name next to this one for who put it down, but the question is about labor relations, so I'm assuming it's Hugo.
Yes. So I feel like this is a question mark. I wrote in parentheses, big question mark. Not sure if I'm projecting here, but it's like, to some extent, this is about, if you see the Robert Pattinson character Ephraim as the worker, and what do you call it? Willem Dafoe's character Tom as the capital owner. There is to some extent like this idea of being completely alienated from your work and not seeing the final product, which is the effect of the lighthouse never being allowed to get there. There's like this overwhelming power and control that the employer has over the worker, and the fact that he
separating the workers from the means of production, that sort of deal.
Very much separating the workers from the means of production, and even the fact that he kind of uses his power to convince him, it's going to be fine, you're going to be home, my books are telling that you're doing a good job, and then eventually when you see the books, in the books he's writing, he's late, he's lazy, he's not doing a good enough job. So he has such a power of control against him. And then eventually he becomes aware of this exploitation and revolutionizes against him and murders him eventually. Like, I don't know if I'm reaching here, but it kind of something that also jumped out at me in the movie. Like, the movie is so esoteric in some ways, but in that way it's so practical.
So to me, this feels like my looking into the names of the characters.
Yeah.
That's the deal. I think it's not something that you can see 100% in the text of the movie.
Right.
But I also think it's interesting because it may not have been intended to be a labor revolution parable.
No. Yeah.
But
exactly.
You can see that the similar reasons why workers revolt is the same reason why
it's not necessarily
Ephraim goes mad.
It's a workers' revolution movie, but it is representing that relationship in a way that feels consistent with that approach. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I don't know. It's something that jumped out at me. It seemed interesting.
I would never describe this as someone as a labor relations movie, but I think it's kind of incidental to the text, like Hugo said. Yeah, I see it.
It's not a labor relations movie, that's for sure.
Go ahead, Hugo.
Yeah, for me, I also wrote Man vs. Nature, and to me that was the one that jumped out almost immediately. I think this idea of the sublime of nature, where nature is so great and powerful that it becomes horrific, even though it's just nature, and man is so small and insignificant in front of it. And it almost, the realization of this smallness drives man insane. And being in isolation, being in this power struggle with this horror character sort of brings out that stuff. I thought that the way the movie begins immediately puts that in front of you, because it's the only time where we see the island as a wide shot. We see it from afar. We see the storm above. We see the clouds, and it felt very romantic in the classical sense of romantic paintings. And I don't know. I think that jumped out at me for sure. There's also an element of, Eldritch Lovecraftian horror, which kind of ties into that as well.
Well, so I think it is interesting because obviously nature not being a sentient thing, it's not exactly enacting ill will towards the characters, but the characters, particularly Ephraim, perceive an ill will from nature. Yeah. And we see that acted out with the seagull.
Mm-hmm. And even Tom himself, he thinks the seagulls represent, the spirits of the
dead sailors and things like that. Yeah. Bad luck to kill a seabird. But so I can totally see that, especially in relation to, like you said, that nature doesn't actually bear ill will, and so all of his frustrations that he's perceiving is self-generated. Mm-hmm. And I think that does contribute to the ultimate madness of Ephraim. Josh, do you want to add anything on that?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, so this next one jumped off the paper to me right away. That isolation is hell, or hell is isolation. So,
yes,
either way, because that's what is the driving force of the madness in this, is that they are trapped on this island. For so long. Josh, in particular, you didn't think hell was necessarily the right word.
Well, I think my interpretation is the isolation is largely what's driving Ephraim insane. But I think, as I kind of alluded, I think there is also something happening on this island that's a little mystic or mythical, given he begins to have visions before he begins to actually go insane. And so there's a purgatory element, I think. The fact that they come to this island and they're supposed to get out after a few weeks, but then they can't get out because their relief can't arrive. And they are, at that point, there for an indeterminate amount of time. Tom actually tells Ephraim, one guy was here for 7 months and had, barely survived that. And so there's a urge to leave, but unable to leave element to this. And that, I think, contributes to the madness. And also, I have to point out that there's a punishment element here. Notably, after Ephraim kills the seagull, after being warned not to, the very next, maybe there might not even be a cut, but the next shot is the wind changing on the vane on top of the lighthouse, and then the changing winds is what affects the weather, what makes the tender relief not able to relieve them of their duty. So it's because he killed the seagull that he is there for an indeterminate amount of time and not able to leave the island. So there's something going on there. There's a punishment element. So whether it's hell or purgatory, there's something going on there, I think.
And the other one that really jumped out to me was the homoerotic scenes and the heteronormative scenes. Especially there's a moment where they kind of combine. There's a lot of the masturbatory scenes, literal masturbatory scenes,
mm-hmm.
And then there's a moment where they're drunk and the two Toms are
they slow dance.
They slow dance, and then they are gonna kiss, and then no, we're men. We have.
Then they fight instead.
And then they fight instead. So. And so that's those two themes collide in that scene to me.
Yeah. I mean, I've if you read the Wikipedia page, I don't remember exactly what it says offhand, but Robert Eggers basically says that's on purpose. I'm not gonna say these characters are gay. I'm not gonna say they're not gay, but there's something going on. Like I said a while ago, this is certainly a psychosexual thriller happening. In the first scene when they arrive in their room for the first time, Rob Pattinson fingers a hole in the mattress.
He finds there's already a hole in the mattress.
Yeah, my first thought is I guess his predecessor really liked that mattress, I guess. And then 10 minutes later he's fixing the shingles and looks in through a hole in the roof and watches as Willem Dafoe. I believe we're supposed to interpret Willem Dafoe as boning his mattress.
He's boning Ephraim's mattress.
Oh, really?
That's how I interpret it, because Ephraim found the hole in his mattress.
I thought maybe there's a hole in both mattresses. I don't know.
God, I hope not.
Yeah,
I thought this was another, potential power situation. Where it's he's doing it to his bed.
There's also obviously he gets this little statuette of a siren or a mermaid, however you want to call it, and he kind of masturbates to it early in the movie. But then later in the movie, you get this scene where it's another surreal scene where he finds an actual siren.
He bones a mermaid.
There's a sex scene, that he has with a mermaid. the sexuality of it is very present.
This is a fun bit of IMDb trivia for you guys. It actually does show a brief shot of the mermaid's genitalia.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I believe they used a shark vagina as the model for the mermaid undercarriage. So,
needless to say, I did not include that screenshot in the YouTube video.
Yeah.
But other things in this topic is about, homoeroticism, but also heteronormativity. I think it's interesting that when Tom chastises Ephraim about mopping the floors, Ephraim says, "I ain't never intended to be no housewife and taking this job." And he resents having to do what's perceived as women's work, and in this marriage, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then when a scene that Hugo alluded to earlier, when Tom freaks out about Ephraim not liking his cooking, that's some married couple shit. And so there's this isn't hard to read into. It's right there on the surface. And then another thing is Tom Willem Dafoe says that his marriage didn't work because he opted to spend 13 Christmases at sea. So he'd rather be at sea with other sailors than at home with his wife on Christmas.
Right.
13 years running. So that's kind of sus, as the kids say. So
there's also
ahead,
somebody else wrote toxic masculinity, and I think the toxic masculinity is represented by a lot. This like sort of unsustainable, endless, twisted, weird horniness that they both have. There's a lot of phallic imagery, like the lighthouse itself is extremely phallic, and also like according to Pattinson, that in an interview, he said that the film was supposed to include a match cut that was from the lighthouse to his erect penis. And the scene, it was in the script, and it was eliminated because the finances didn't want it in the movie. But like, it was very overtly trying to put those elements in there. And
the toxic masculinity, even beyond the sexual stuff in there, it's also, like we were talking about earlier, the way the old man is, belittling everything that the young man is doing in terms of obtaining a position of power over him. Yeah. I think that also ties into the toxic masculinity themes.
Yeah, and their relationship is kind of built around like him gaslighting him, Tom gaslighting Ephraim, and the weird
that was the next one I wanted to talk about. Yeah, the father-son relationship.
Weird father-son relationship, and like the fact that they hate each other, but they also love each other, and Ephraim specifically hates him. He wants to take his place, he wants to overcome him, but at the same time he's constantly like seeking his validation in some weird twisted way. And I think it's almost kind of Freudian if you tie it into like the idea of the homoeroticism that we saw earlier. So yeah, all these dynamics kind of work together to create this very strange relationship.
And in our topic, in our outline here, I don't know who it was who added this photo, but it's a painting. Was it you or Josh? It was Hugo. A painting by Sasha Schneider called Hypnosis.
Yeah,
from
which is a shot in the movie.
And there's an almost identical shot in the movie. So I've censored the image. I'm putting it up on the screen right now, though, so you can see this painting. And Hugo, why did you want to include this in particular in the toxic masculinity portion of our discussion?
I just think it was a particularly striking image from the movie where he has this ray that it almost hits him directly in the eyes, and it's this idea of the hypnosis. It kind of, I think it ties into this whole relationship that they have where he's gaslighting him, but they also love each other and they hate each other, and it kind of ties it all together. It's almost as he has control on him, and from Ephraim's point of view, then maybe this is a vision. He's kind of perceiving it as if he's like the cause of him kind of going insane and being so subjugated is the gaslighting and the power dynamics that Tom is doing, and that's why he eventually rebels and kills him.
There's also a visual signifier of the lighthouse itself, that maybe the lighthouse has hypnosis powers, then like Tom becomes a lighthouse in this image. Yeah. And so all that that's what makes this movie so fascinating to me, is that like, how many metaphors can you cram into a single shot? Like he's getting it all in there. It's crazy. The other thing I wanted to talk about and it looks like Josh is in here. There's a blend of mythology with the insanity in this movie. Obviously, all the talk of Triton and the sea gods and all that stuff.
that is all based in very common sailor mythos, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it works its way into all of his nightmare scenes as well. This is where we get the Lovecraftian things as well. But in particular, I found it interesting, the connection between Prometheus and Proteus. Proteus is the god of the sea, and Prometheus in mythology stole from the gods.
Prometheus stole fire from the gods, which is kind of why I put Prometheus in the outlines, because the light of the lighthouse itself clearly has some kind of like mythical, otherworldly thing that like Willem Dafoe protects jealously, and Rob Pattinson and Ephraim wants access to. So there's a Fire of the Gods Prometheus thing with the lighthouse itself, I thought, at least.
Just looking at that one scene again, where the light is being gazed into his eyes, I don't know, it's all very mythological to me. And that also works into the end of the movie here, which we will talk about now. There's the moment where Tom Wake, the old man, goes to stop Ephraim from stealing the dory and heading out to sea. The dory being their small, rowboat. And he stops him by chopping the boat into bits. Well, then they come back into the lighthouse and, Tom tells him, "You did that. That wasn't me. You did that." And this is the breaking point for young Tom, where he finally just starts wailing on old Tom and is killing him. And we jump between, various images of, like, one punch it's a mermaid, another punch it's Tom as a crustacean crusted
He's
barnacles.
one of the characters in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, exactly. Which to me is like the sea gods stuff coming into play there. And then again, it's the guy that he let die at his old job, and he's beating the crap out of him. And then things somehow get even weirder. He ties a rope around his neck and walks him out of the lighthouse like a dog. Which let's go back to the power dynamic theme of the movie here. He's literally forced the old man to act as a dog to him. And then walks him out and is burying him alive.
Which
absolutely
another moment where Willem Dafoe is so great as a performer, because he keeps going with his line, which are absolutely wild and insane in this moment, while dirt is being thrown at his face. Like, just I thought it was another element of brilliant acting.
Agreed.
And then, what does young Tom do? But the thing that he's wanted to do since he first got to the island: take the key and go look at the light. And we get the final scene of the movie.
Well, something happens before that.
Okay.
Well, after he gets buried alive, Tom Wake is not done. He comes back and tries to attack. Yeah. He tries which is, again, I kind of don't know what's real and what's not real. Like, he comes back and doesn't look like he had recently been buried alive. So I wonder if one or both of those things either didn't fully happen or didn't happen the way that we see it, because after being buried alive, he comes back and tries to attack Rob Pattinson with an axe, and then instead gets an axe himself, and then presumably is killed by the axe. And then he goes to the lighthouse.
Yes. And the last thing we see of young Tom is him staring at the light, and he begins to laugh, and the sound grows and builds until you can't hear.
It becomes very distorted.
And a lot of fuzz. I don't know if there's something to it, but the blood on his face outlines just the eyes and his mouth, which gives his face a skull-like quality, which I think is really, really cool, especially in the black and white that this whole movie was shot in.
And the light becomes distorted, too. The light becomes kind of washed out as well as the sound, and it adds to that effect that you're just talking about.
So what do we derive from the ending here?
And also the final scene is we see him on the ground being eaten alive by the seagulls, like right after this. Yeah. I love this scene, like the scene where I like that the little door window to the light opens by itself, like he doesn't open it, like it opens almost as if there's this supernatural force that is revealing this light to him, and that his reaction isn't just terror, it's also ecstasy. Like it's a bit of both. He's terrified by it, but he's also laughing and screaming, and it's almost this overwhelming feeling of being taken over by this, like this truth of something that he's seeing in this light, that it's either him going completely insane, or if there is something supernatural happening, just something so large being revealed to him that his mind isn't able to handle it. I think this ending is perfect for this movie. It's really fantastic.
Then he tumbles down the steps.
Yeah. And the movie cuts.
And it cuts, and then we find him outside.
Then he's on the rocks. Like,
what happened?
I don't know.
That's another thing why I was a little unsure about what's real and what isn't, and what was this all delusion from the start, because we jump from him having fallen down the steps but still being inside to being outside, disrobed, and being picked apart by seagulls on the shoreline there.
Who have already picked out his eyes, almost as if, you only get to see the light once and you're undone by it.
So, Josh, what is this ending about? What does this mean?
Well, that's why I think it's like a punishment thing. Just because, like, he's warned, I think at like the 20-minute mark by Tom, like, it's bad luck to kill seabirds. They are the souls of sailors, what met their demise, whatever, at the sea. And, like, he doesn't heed that advice. And he has, like, conflicts with seagulls throughout the movie. And then also, like, he's told by Tom, you can't look at the light, I'm the keeper of the light, and he also does not heed that advice. And so it feels like he's being punished twofold for things that he was warned he'd be punished for. Being, killed by the light and basically eaten by seabirds.
And the fact that we also see the character that he killed when he's hitting, Tom, is another element of something that he might be punished for,
He's presumably done things worthy of punishment before he got to the lighthouse, and we see him do a lot of things worthy of punishment. So I think that it's, he's getting his comeuppance, I think, is the final thing, which is, again, why I think it kind of is suggestive of supernatural, like, heaven-hell, purgatory situation. Also, I think I put this on the outline. Did you guys see the visual foreshadowing of the ending at, like, the half-hour mark or so?
You'll have to be more specific.
So he's on, like, Tom is holding Ephraim up on this, like, painter's ladder thing where he's trying to paint the exterior of the lighthouse, and it's kind of shaky. And then, like, the rope he's holding him on breaks, and he falls, like, 20 feet or so, and then comes to. He's speckled in white paint, which is later bird shit in the final image. But he wakes up laying on the rock, covered in white paint, with a seagull, biting at his knee. And that's, like, a visual precursor for exactly what happens to him in the final movie, which is laying on the rock covered in white with seagulls pecking at him. And I thought that was interesting, and I hadn't noticed that before.
That is interesting. And do you think that, like, has any particular meaning, or is it just a setup, a foreshadowing of how he's going to go?
The seagulls kind of, torment him throughout the movie. Yeah. So, it's just an escalation of that. At the beginning, they kind of just annoy him and don't let him go into, a room, and then they pick at his knee.
Then they get the last laugh.
Then he kills the one,
Was that seagull at the beginning on the steps, did it only have one eye?
Yes. Okay. The seagull he continuously encounters only has one eye.
Well, until he beats
the one he ultimately kills. Yeah. But yeah, I think we're intended to believe that's the same seagull. We're intended to understand that.
Yeah, so, and we also hear, and this is, again, the mythos here, that the seagulls are the souls of sailors who had died, and the skull or the head that he finds in the lobster box was he believes is the former partner of old Tom, and
didn't have
missing an eye.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Just absolutely excellent.
So maybe
visual
that partner
storytelling
is
there.
Getting double killed. Like, he got killed in real life, and he got killed as a seagull.
Yeah.
Anyway, do we want to rank this movie?
Yes, we should rank this film. I even meant to put my ranking on here earlier, but I'll do so now. Hugo, where did you want to rank this movie?
Obviously having to deal with the list as it currently constructed, I'm going very high with this. I love this movie. I specifically seeing it the second time just kind of really let it sink into me. And going from the top, I'm going to put it in the top 10 at number 6 below Shaun of the Dead. So the top 5 are Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Dr. Strangelove, The Silence of the Lambs, Paddington 2, and Shaun of the Dead. And I wouldn't put it higher than other movies that are on the list because I like them more personally. But if I start from the top, I kind of get a cut-off after Shaun of the Dead where I would put this. I think would be top 10 on my personal list as well.
So for me, I would put this just below The Wind Rises at number 17 on our list. Same as always, there's definitely movies that are lower on the list that I would probably like better than The Lighthouse, but we'll do our corrections at a later date. Josh, where do you put it?
I'm putting it behind Bicycle Thieves at number 23. It's crazy that Bicycle Thieves is number 22 for us. That's just wild to me. Anyway, after Bicycle Thieves, so number 23. So that means we have number 6, number 17, and number 23, which averages out to 15 and a third. So does that mean After Your Name?
Before the After Your Name.
Yes.
Yep, After Your Name.
After Your Name, Above the Wind Rises. Yep. So pretty high. Is this the highest one we've had recently? I guess Memories of Murder is higher.
Yes, but still, like we've talked about, it's really hard to crack. It's hard to crack our top 20 at this point, let alone our top 10. So Lighthouse should be pretty
adaptation. Adaptation did recently crack the top 20, though.
It did.
It's number 18 right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So that's it for this week's Film to Remember. What are we talking about next week, Josh?
Pardon me while I yawn. Next week, we're continuing our trend of discussing movies that are related to our most anticipated from 2022. And one of my most anticipated from 2022 is the 4th film by Martin McDonagh. So for our Film to Remember next week, I want to talk about the first film from Martin McDonagh, which is called In Bruges from 2008, starring Brendan Gleeson, Colin Farrell, and Ralph Fiennes. It's one of my absolute favorite movies, and I'm so excited to talk about it.
Well, something to look forward to for sure. Hugo, where can people find you on them internets?
You can find me on them internets at Hugo_Pinay on Twitter and at Hugo Pinay on letterboxd.
And Josh?
On Twitter at The Sloop Josh B. On YouTube, Movies I Love, So Can You. Look out for my Oscar reviews coming out next month.
And I can't say this enough. Josh's Oscar reviews are excellent. And
thanks, man.
They really are.
Really nice.
I watch them every year. Even despite us talking about them. Because I really do love them. They're great recaps. And so highly recommend that. If you aren't already watching those, they should be... Every Oscar movie fan should add that to their list of things that they have to watch in preparation for the Oscars. You can find me on twitch.tv/goodgamegrizz. You can find me on Twitter and letterboxd at goodgamegrizz. Just about everywhere. Look for me at goodgamegrizz. I'd love to hear your thoughts on our show here today. So, and if you don't mind, if you're listening to this on a podcast service, we would love to get some reviews. So let us know what you think about our podcast. Reviews help additional people find new podcasts to listen to, and we'd love for more people to try out our stuff, see what they think. So, thank you for joining us this week. Please come back again. We really love talking about these movies, and can't wait to do it again next week. Bye, everybody.
Why'd you spill your beans, boy?
Yes, of course.